Night fell over Seoul, shrouded in a deceptive calm, as if the entire city held its breath before an inevitable disaster. In the imposing Han mansion, where luxury mingled with solitude, a scream shattered the silence, echoing the sound of a home that had just crumbled. Beneath the crystal chandeliers, Han Ji-seok, the CEO admired by investors and feared by rivals, stared at his wife with a look that mixed disbelief, anger, and something deeper, the fear of having been betrayed. Eun-woo, standing. In the center of the hall, the baby pressed to her chest, seemed a shadow of her former self. The cold marble beneath her feet was more merciful than the gaze of the man who once promised to protect her. "Did you cheat on me?" he asked, his firm, calculated voice sounding crueler than a scream. His mother, Yoo Mi-kyung, watched from afar, as if witnessing the execution of a long-desired plan. Eun-woo tried to explain, but each word died before reaching his heart. "Is this my child?" he insisted. And the baby, as if feeling the weight of injustice, began to cry. Ji-seok demanded a DNA test right there in front of everyone, reducing their love to a case of public suspicion. Driven from her own home under indifferent gazes, Eun-woo fell to her knees, vowing to herself that this humiliation would be remembered. But what would happen when the man who destroyed her was forced to discover that the real deception never came from her? If this story had you hooked from the beginning, subscribe now and leave a like, because what comes next will prove that no lie stays hidden forever. Before hatred and shame settled between them, there was a time when Han Ji-seok believed in love, a love that seemed capable of defying fate itself. It was on a cloudy afternoon, on the bustling streets of Hongdae, that he first saw her. Eun-woo worked in a small corner cafe, surrounded by the aroma of freshly ground coffee and the soft sound of oldies. As she delicately cleaned tables, she smiled at customers, unaware that a man in an expensive suit was watching her silently, intrigued by the simplicity of her presence. Ji-seok was the heir to one of Seoul's most influential families, and his every gesture carried the weight of a dynasty accustomed to command and be obeyed. But before her, he felt human for the first time. Eun-woo didn't know who he was, and perhaps that was what fascinated him most. She didn't fear him, didn't flatter him. She simply looked at him with that calm, transparent gaze that seemed to penetrate the shield of arrogance he used to hide his emptiness. He began coming to the cafe every day just to see her pour tea with both hands and thank him with a shy smile. Love grew silently, like a stubborn seed amidst the concrete. But the fate of an heir is not his to make. The Han family saw Eun-woo as a stain, a threat to their image of perfection. Yoo Mi-kyung, his mother, was the first to object. "A nameless woman cannot carry the Han surname," she said coldly. Still, Ji-seok defied tradition, vowing to fight for her no matter what. They married in a low-key ceremony, surrounded by promises and illusions of eternity. It was raining heavily that day, and he held her face tenderly, saying, "Even if the world turns its back, I'll be here." Eun-woo believed, and when she embraced him in the rain, he believed that no power could destroy what they had built. But love, when born between two opposing worlds, carries with it the weight of the inevitable. The walls of that mansion never accepted her presence, and the looks that followed her through the hallways were made of venom, disguised as respect. Ji-seok began to feel the pressure from her family, the prudent advice, the cruel comparisons. The man who once defended her began to fall silent, and it was in this silence that the shadows found space to grow. Because the true poison comes not from words, but from the lies that are whispered when the heart begins to doubt. Trust is like glass. All it takes is a small crack for an entire empire to crumble. And it was this crack that began to form within Han Ji-seok's heart, without him even realizing it. It all started with a seemingly harmless visit. Yoo Mi-kyung, his mother, called the oldest maid in the house Yura, a sweet-spoken woman with downcast eyes, but with the poison of envy coursing through her veins. "I want you to find out everything this woman does when my son isn't home," she ordered. And so began the slow destruction of a love. Days later, the first lies were planted like seeds in fertile soil. Yura feigned friendship with Eun-woo, sharing confidences and falsely smiling, while secretly taking photos, creating the perfect narrative. Encounters with an unknown man, fabricated messages, a doctored story of betrayal. The images ended up in Ji-seok's hands, accompanied by an anonymous letter that read, "The woman you call your wife laughs behind your back." Doubt, subtle and cowardly, crept into his mind like a shadow. Ji-seok began to observe Eun-woo's every gesture. He noticed when she took a long time to answer the phone, when she seemed pensive, staring out the window. Love gave way to vigilance. He no longer asked questions, only silently judged. And the silence between them became deafening. Eun-woo, unable to understand the reason for the distance, tried to get closer. She prepared his favorite meals, waited up late for him, left love notes on his desk. But nothing seemed to reach him. The man who had once looked at her tenderly now looked away, as if he were a stranger. The sweet words became cold monosyllables. "You're different, Ji-seok," she said one day, holding his arm. "Don't you trust me anymore?" He walked away, not daring to answer. That night he received an envelope discreetly left on his desk. Inside, more fake photos. Eun-woo walking beside the same man, this time with a slight smile, a gesture that, out of context, seemed intimate. He closed his eyes, feeling anger and shame overcome him. In a fit of rage, he tore up her letter before reading it, tearing up his last chance at redemption along with it. Meanwhile, Eun-woo cried alone in her room, unaware that fate had already begun to plot her punishment. Because when pride replaces love and lies are easier to believe than the truth, the next step is always public destruction, and no one is ready for the weight of humiliation before the world. The main hall of the Han mansion glowed with golden lights, crystal goblets, and practiced smiles. It was the matriarch's birthday, a lavish event discreetly covered by magazine columns and gossip columnists. Eun-woo looked beautiful that night. She wore a simple white dress made of lightweight fabric, which clashed with the other wealthy wives' over-the-top jewelry. Little did she know that this would be the dress that would mark the end of her dignity. Ji-seok entered in an impeccable black suit, his face impassive, but his gaze hard as steel. He greeted guests and toasted, but within him the poison of lies boiled, ready to overflow. As the orchestra played a soft melody, her mother approached and whispered in her ear, "This is the right night. Show everyone who she really is." And as if it were a remote control, Ji-seok raised his glass and summoned the guests' attention. The sound of the violins ceased. Everyone's breath caught. Eun-woo, confused, watched from afar, unaware of what was about to happen. "I want to make a toast," he began, his smile reaching his eyes. "A toast to the truth." Some guests laughed, confused. He stepped forward, staring at his wife. "Because sometimes lies sleep in our own homes." The glass trembled in her hand. Eun-woo tried to approach, but he backed away. "Tell me, Eun-woo, who have you been seeing while I'm working? Tell everyone here." A murmur ran through the room. The journalist's cameras captured the exact moment her world collapsed. Eun-woo wept, shaking his head, unsure how the man who promised to protect her had become her accuser. "Ji-seok, please, you're wrong." Her voice echoed frail, but he was already consumed by anger and the fear of being ridiculed. "Mistaken," he laughed, a laugh that hurt more than any slap. "Then explain these photos." He threw the images onto the table, manipulated photos, crude montages that at that moment seemed like irrefutable proof. The silence was deathly. Eun-woo fell to his knees, denying it between sobs. "No, I never cheated on you. I swear on our son." But Ji-seok wouldn't listen. "Our son," he spat the words like venom. "Do you really think I believe that? Don't I have another name to uphold? I'd rather bear the shame of a divorce than a bastard child." Those words cut through the air like razors. The audience looked away, unable to bear the scene. His mother watched contentedly. The spectacle was complete. The powerful man showed that even love could be crushed in the name of reputation. Eun-woo staggered to his feet, his face streaked with tears. "I never needed your name, Ji-seok. I only wanted your heart." But it was too late. He turned, walked away, and left, while the audience feigned applause to mask their embarrassment. She was left alone in the center of the room, her white dress now stained with wine and tears. Outside, the rain fell mercilessly. Eun-woo walked out barefoot, the cold wind biting her skin, the baby moving in her womb. Each step was a farewell, each drop of rain a reminder of the love that pride had destroyed. Behind her, the mansion still glowed, as if mocking the pain it had just caused. And when the door closed behind him, fate smiled silently. Because what Ji-seok didn't yet know is that the universe has a precise way of balancing the books, and the price of injustice would begin to be exacted much sooner than he imagined. The rain never stopped that morning as Eun-woo walked through the streets of Seoul, shoes in hand, heart in pieces. Each bolt of lightning seemed to echo the sound of her own ruin. Her white dress was now dirty, heavy, clinging to her skin. Taxis passed by non-stop, and she walked aimlessly, clutching her belly with both hands, as if the only shelter she had left was the baby who hadn't even arrived yet. By sunrise, she was far from the city, riding an old bus through the mountains toward the countryside. No suitcases, no plans, just silence and dry tears on her face. She arrived in the small village of Andong, where the wooden houses retained the scent of earth and solitude. There, she rented a tiny room in the back of the house from an elderly seamstress who in time would become her only friend. Eun-woo began sewing clothes for neighbors in exchange for a few coins. Her hands, which once held crystals, now mended worn fabrics. Everyone in the village knew who she was, or at least they thought they did. The wife driven out by the rich husband, they said, and doors would quietly close behind her. But amidst the shame and the cold, there was something unbreakable within her, the faith that time would reveal the truth. At night, she would sit by the window and speak to the baby in a low voice, as if the wind were a messenger. "You are innocent, my love, and one day you will know that your mother never lied." The stars were her only solace, and the silence her only witness. Even tired, she smiled when she felt the little one kick, remembering that there was still life, still love inside her. But her body was beginning to weaken. The long hours of sewing, the cold, the lack of food, everything weighed on her. And on that stormy night, when thunder boomed over the rooftops, Eun-woo felt a sharp pain shoot through her stomach. The cloth fell from her hands, the ground seemed to spin, and the scream that escaped her lips mingled with the sound of the wind. She tried to reach the door, but her body gave way. Alone on the floor of the old house, Eun-woo went into labor. No neighbors heard, no help arrived. Only the rain pounding against the window as if the sky mourned her, and when the first light of dawn touched her face, something inexplicable happened. Fate, which seemed to have forgotten her, decided to leave a sign, a divine reminder that the truth never hides forever. Dawn arrived with the distant sound of bells and the scent of freshly fallen rain. Inside the small wooden house, the silence was shattered by the cry of a newborn, a fragile sound, yet powerful enough to pierce the darkness that had settled over Eun-woo's life. Exhausted, she could barely keep her eyes open. Her face was pale, her body trembling, but when she heard her son's first breath, She felt strength surge through her veins. The baby was wrapped in a simple cloth, and the local nurse, hurriedly summoned by a neighbor, noticed something that made her hesitate. "Madam," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "look at this." Eun-woo looked on, confused until she saw it. Under the boy's right eye there was a small crescent-shaped birthmark, the same symbol Han Ji-seok had carried since birth, the same sign that made him unique among thousands. For an instant, time seemed to stand still. The tears fell again, but this time they were different. They weren't of pain, nor of shame, they were of justice. She held her son to her chest, caressed the small mark, and whispered, "You are the living truth, what the world has tried to deny." Outside, the rain slowly stopped, and the sun filtered through the window, illuminating the baby's face like a silent blessing. It was as if the universe itself was leaving a warning. The truth always finds its way, even when men try to erase it. The following days were spent recovering and reflecting. Eun-woo, even weak, couldn't stop looking at her son and wondering where fate intended to take them. She had no answers, but she was certain of one thing. This little being was her proof and her hope. The seamstress who had sheltered her commented, "God doesn't. Right wrong, my child. Sometimes he just waits for the right moment to turn the page." And Eun-woo understood. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something greater. A justice that approached, slow and silent, like the breath of an inevitable revelation. She kissed her son's forehead and promised, "One day, everyone will see who you are. And when that day comes, the whole world will remember what your father's pride destroyed." But as she was reborn with her son in her arms, miles away, Han Ji-seok began to feel an emptiness that neither power nor money nor time could fill, the kind of silence that heralds the beginning of true punishment. 3 years had passed since that stormy night, and Han Ji-seok's life followed the bitter course of a soulless victory. The Han Group empire had never been more profitable. Newspapers extolled his genius, and shareholders revered him as an economic prodigy. But none of this filled the void that expanded within him like a wound that refused to heal. In the rare moments of silence, when the office lights dimmed and the glow of the screens ceased to distract him, Eun-woo's name lingered in his mind like a haunting echo. He tried to push the memory away, but it was useless. The more successful he became, the more of a failure he felt inside. The house, once filled with voices and footsteps, had grown cold. The walls reflected the weight of regret he wouldn't admit. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Ji-seok would find himself sitting on the sofa, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the reflection of his own birthmark in the mirror. That half-moon beneath his eye seemed to mock him, reminding him that the truth could be erased from memory, but never from consciousness. One morning, opening an antique drawer, he found the silver necklace Eun-woo had forgotten, a star-shaped pendant, simple, almost childlike. He held it for long minutes, and for the first time in years, he felt tears well up in his eyes. The arrogance that had defined him seemed to dissolve little by little, giving way to a kind of pain that power could not numb. His mother, Yoo-mi-kyung, noticed his melancholy, but instead of compassion, she offered contempt. "Stop living in the past, Ji-seok. The woman you defend shamed you. It was a mistake, nothing more." He responded with a blank stare. Deep down, he knew the fault wasn't hers. It was his. And time, with its patient cruelty, began to claim every second of silence, every word spoken in pride, every tear she shed alone. One night, he dreamed of Eun-woo. She was standing in the rain, wearing the same white dress from the night she left, holding a baby in her arms. She looked at him sadly and said, "The truth was born, Ji-seok, and you rejected it." He woke sweating, his heart racing, feeling the echo of those words vibrate in his chest. In the following days, he began avoiding mirrors, parties, and social engagements. All he did was work, as if excessive productivity could drown out the sound of guilt. But no matter how hard he tried, a growing emptiness consumed him, like a shadow that followed him everywhere. And it would be precisely when destiny seemed calmer that the blow would come, the reunion that he never imagined would happen, and that would forever change the course of his redemption. Fate often chooses the quietest moments to make noise. Han Ji-seok was on a business trip in the small town of Andong, where a new branch of the group was to be inaugurated. The event was simple, but his presence drew attention. The powerful man, surrounded by security, stepping out of a black car that reflected the cloudy sky. Nothing seemed out of place until, amid the crowd, a tiny detail dismantled the empire of coolness he had built. Across the street, a woman held a child's hand. Her long hair, tied in a simple bun, blew in the wind. Ji-seok felt something inside him freeze. Even from a distance, his body recognized what his mind tried to deny. It was Eun-woo. His heart raced, words faded. He blinked, thinking it was an illusion, but the boy tugged at his mother's dress, and the innocent gesture was enough to prove it wasn't a dream. She was alive, stronger, more serene, and completely beyond his reach. Instinctively, Ji-seok took a step forward, but his bodyguard stopped him, believing he'd spotted a protester in the crowd. "Let me go," he murmured, his voice breaking. When he finally crossed the street, Eun-woo had already turned the corner, the boy in his arms. Driven by impulse, he followed the sound of her voice calling to his son gently. "Hanol, be careful crossing." The name echoed in his mind. Hanol, heaven. Irony of fate. The same name they had dreamed of giving their son before everything fell apart. When the boy dropped a toy, Ji-seok bent down to pick it up. Then the world stopped. The child's face was turned toward him, and under his right eye was a small crescent-shaped mark, identical to his. For an instant, time seemed to freeze. Ji-seok gasped. The ground disappeared. That symbol pierced him like a sentence. Eun-woo watched him from afar. His eyes no longer held the sweet sparkle they once held, just a distant, almost cold calm, like someone looking back with no desire to return. Ji-seok tried to speak, but the words died before they could be uttered. She took her son's hand and walked away without saying a word. He stood there, trembling, the toy still in his hand, the sound of the rain beginning. To fall seemed to applaud the moment the truth reached him. No lie could protect him anymore, and in that very moment, the man who had once doubted love realized that life was about to turn its mirror to him, and the reflection he would see would reveal much more than just lost fatherhood. Han Ji-seok spent the night awake. The child's face, the brightness in his eyes, the mark under his right eye, it all haunted him like a truth that time could not erase. He tried to convince himself it was coincidence, a cruel trick of the imagination, but his heart knew there was no mistake. It was his son, the same one he had rejected, the same one who cried in his mother's arms as he turned his back. The next day, Ji-seok discreetly sent one of his trusted aides to investigate. It didn't take long for the report to reach him. The birth certificate confirmed the impossible. The boy had been born exactly during the period Eun-woo had been expelled from the mansion. No doubt, no loophole. Blood that ran through that child's veins was the same Han blood. As he read the document, his hands trembled. It was as if the paper were burning. And when he discovered, from the details in the medical records, that the birthmark was hereditary, identical to his own, Ji-seok felt the weight of all his sins fall upon his shoulders at once. The room seemed to spin. For the first time in years, he wept, not for the loss of his wife, but for the monstrosity of having doubted her. for the next few days. He wandered Andong searching for Eun-woo, unescorted, unluxurious, just an ordinary man trying to reclaim what he'd destroyed. When he finally found her leaving the small sewing shop where she worked, he stopped a few meters away. His heart was pounding, and fear prevented him from approaching. But she saw him. She stopped too, holding her son's hand, and looked at him with serene, unwavering eyes. "Did you come to see what you destroyed?" she asked, her voice calm, without rancor, but filled with an old pain. He tried to explain, but she interrupted. "No need. Life has already shown me everything I needed to learn." Ji-seok wanted to apologize, wanted to tell him how consumed he was with regret, but the words wouldn't come. Eun-woo turned, bent down, and whispered something in his son's ear before walking away. The boy nodded shyly, unsure of what was happening, and Ji-seok saw in that innocence a reflection of the purity he had corrupted. Back at the hotel, he stared at his own reflection in the mirror, and for the first time felt disgusted with the man he was. That empty gaze no longer belonged to a victorious CEO, but to a nameless father, condemned to live with the weight of doubt. But fate hadn't finished its lesson yet, because when the truth is revealed, it doesn't just heal wounds. It also exposes all masks before the world. And what was about to happen would turn every word he'd ever spoken against him, before everyone's eyes. The day of the Han Group's grand conference dawned bright, but Ji-seok felt the weight of a storm about to break loose within him. It would be the most important event of the year, broadcast on television, with journalists, investors, and authorities in attendance. The goal was to announce a billion-dollar merger, which would cement his reputation as the most influential man in South Korea. But as the spotlight prepared to capture him at his peak, fate tuned the strings of his silent judgment. Backstage, he was pale. His gaze was distant, his mind lost between past and present. Looking at his own reflection in the mirror, he saw the half-moon under his eye and remembered the child. That small face wouldn't leave him alone. It was as if the universe were writing its verdict on his skin. "Today is your rebirth, Ji-seok," his mother had said minutes earlier. He just smiled wearily, knowing that in truth, this was the beginning of his punishment. In the hall, the guests rose to their feet in applause as he entered. The speech was ready. The flashes illuminated everything. Ji-seok took the microphone and began speaking firmly, but his voice trembled subtly. He spoke of success, of legacy, of honor, words that to him now sounded hollow. It was at that moment that fate decided to act. From the back of the hall, the high-pitched sound of a child running could be heard. The hubbub grew louder, and cameras turned. A little boy had escaped his mother's grasp and was running innocently toward the stage. Ji-seok froze. The boy stopped before him, his eyes curious and sincere. The audience laughed, thinking it was an adorable sight, but Ji-seok recognized it immediately, the mark under the right eye. Time stood still. Eun-woo appeared right behind, panting, trying to reach his son, but it was too late. The cameras captured the exact moment the stage lights revealed the impossible. The boy with the same birthmark as the CEO. Within seconds, the entire hall fell into a deafening silence. People looked at each other in confusion. The photographers clicked their flashes. Ji-seok felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. No words could undo what everyone had just seen. The truth, which he had denied for years, now exposed him before the entire world. Eun-woo stood in the distance, her gaze serene, almost compassionate. The same man who had humiliated her in front of hundreds was now exposed before thousands. His mother stood up, pale, trying to hide her panic. "Get this woman out of here!" she screamed, but no one moved. The nearest journalist captured the image of father and son side by side. the two identical marks, the same line that united blood and sin. The headlines began to be typed in real time: the Han heir and the secret son. The scandal the empire tried to hide. Ji-seok dropped the microphone. No sound came from his mouth, only tears, which he no longer had the strength to hold back. The boy innocently asked, "Why is the young man crying, Mommy?" And that phrase echoed throughout the room like a final blow. Eun-woo approached, took his son by the hand, and led him away silently. Ji-seok fell to his knees on the stage, his suit crumpled, his pride shattered. The cameras continued to roll, capturing not just a scandal, but the exact picture of karma. The man who once doubted love, now humbled by the truth itself. And when the hall emptied, only the sound of flashes and the weight of regret remained. But fate still had one last lesson in store, because forgiveness, when it arrives, doesn't always come to console. Sometimes it comes to teach what pain couldn't. That night, the city seemed quieter than ever. Rain was falling again on the windows of the car parked in front of the small house in Andong. Inside, Han Ji-seok held a bouquet of white flowers, the same ones Eun-woo liked to put in the living room vase when they still lived together. The petals trembled between his fingers. He took a deep breath and got out of the car. Each step toward the door was heavy, as if carrying the weight of all the words he'd once said and now wanted to swallow. When Eun-woo opened the door, she fell silent. Time seemed to stand still for her. Only the strength in her eyes had changed. Ji-seok tried to speak, but his voice faltered. "I didn't come to ask you to come back to me. I came to ask for forgiveness." The words came out low, trembling like a confession. "I destroyed you, and because of my pride, I destroyed myself. What I saw on stage today was God showing me the extent of my blindness." She stood motionless, watching him kneel in the rain. The flowers fell to the ground, soaked. Ji-seok looked up and continued, "I saw my son, Eun-woo. I saw the mark. He is the mirror of my shame and my redemption. I don't ask you to love me, but at least allow me to be the father he deserves." For a moment, the wind blew between them, as if even time hesitated to interrupt. Then Eun-woo replied, his voice calm yet sharp. "Ji-seok, you asked me to prove that son was yours, and heaven did. Now it's up to you to prove that you're worthy to call him your son." He lowered his head, feeling the weight of what he could never get back. Eun-woo stepped forward, looked up at the sky, and said, "You taught me that love can die when there is no trust, and I learned that forgiveness is not forgetting. It is freedom." And without waiting for an answer, he closed the door slowly. Ji-seok remained there, kneeling in the rain, the sound of the drops, mingling with the silent tears that fell. And as the wind carried away the scent of the crushed flowers, fate prepared its last page, the final chapter where pride would be just a memory and the punishment, a lifetime of silence. Time passed, and with it, the seasons changed. But Han Ji-seok remained trapped in a never-ending winter. Years had faded since the scandal, and the glory of the Han name had become but a faded memory, a distant echo of power that no longer commanded respect. Only melancholy. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and dominance, now stood like a tomb of memories. The walls seemed to breathe regret, and the silent corridors kept the footsteps of a man who had lost everything money could not buy. Ji-seok was no longer the admired CEO, the infallible man who dictated the fate of companies and people. He lived a slow, almost invisible routine, inside a house by the sea, where the sound of the waves was the only remaining dialogue in his life. He would spend hours sitting by the window, gazing at the horizon, as if the sea could give him back the time he had wasted. The wind blew against the glass and reminded him of something he tried to forget. Eun-woo's voice, low and sweet. asking only to be heard, and the cry of the newborn son he had rejected. Sometimes I read about her success in the newspapers. The former tailor shop, barely surviving on the outskirts of Seoul, was now a renowned atelier, featured in fashion magazines and invited to international events. The name Eun-woo Atelier appeared in elegant letters, a symbol of resilience and talent. Ji-seok kept clippings of each article, hidden inside a wooden box in his bedroom closet. It was the silent way he found to continue following the life that no longer belonged to him. In the pages of a local newspaper, he once saw a photo of his son, now a teenager, tall, with the same calm smile as his mother. His gaze, though young, held a serenity reminiscent of Ji-seok's childhood, when he still believed love was unbreakable. And there was one detail impossible to ignore. Under his left eye, a small, crescent-shaped mark, just like his own, living proof of the truth he refused to see. That night, he couldn't sleep. He paced the empty house, touching the furniture as if searching for a trace of himself. He stopped in front of the hallway mirror and saw the reflection of a man he didn't recognize. The tired look, the graying hair, the haggard expression. Nothing remained of the empire he'd once been. He raised his hand and touched his own face, lingering on the small mark he'd also inherited. Some truths only reveal themselves when love is gone, he murmured, his voice breaking. Regret didn't kill him, but it kept him alive long enough to carry the weight of memory. Time, like a cruel sculptor, carved the marks of guilt into him. Ji-seok now understood that the harshest punishment isn't rejection from others, but the silence of those who know they've made a mistake and have no one left to ask for forgiveness. One morning, as he walked the streets near the boys' school, fate decided to test his courage. On the other side of the fence, he saw his son running, surrounded by classmates, laughing loudly, with a sparkle in his eyes that lit up the entire courtyard. Ji-seok stopped, his heart racing. For a moment, he wanted to call out to him, say what he'd never had the courage to say, explain what could no longer be explained. But he stood there, motionless, watching as if contemplating something sacred. The boy noticed his presence and, unsure of who the man standing in the distance was, smiled kindly. Ji-seok returned the gesture, and in that brief meeting of eyes, time seemed to stand still. A tear slowly ran down his face, silent but filled with everything words could never express. It was the only form of forgiveness he knew how to offer. In the following days, he began walking to that spot every morning, just to watch him from afar. He never approached, never tried to speak. He watched the boy grow in silence with the same care as someone observing a miracle that doesn't belong to them. And somehow, that ritual brought him peace. One afternoon, sitting in his office, he received a letter. Inside was a simple handwritten invitation, fashion exhibition, restart collection, by Eun-woo Han. Her surname caught attention, he. She had kept him not out of dependence but out of redemption. Ji-seok hesitated before deciding to attend, hidden among the guests. In the brightly lit hall, he saw Eun-woo in the distance. She dressed with serene elegance, the calm look of someone who had conquered without needing to destroy. When her son took the stage to help her present the collection, his heart nearly stopped. The audience applauded, the lights reflecting off the delicate garments that symbolized forgiveness and rebirth. Ji-seok watched in silence, tears flowing uncontrollably. At the end of the night, she discreetly approached the exit, leaving on the donation table an envelope with a clipping of the first newspaper article about her and a note. The world has finally seen what I was too blind to see. He left unnoticed, disappearing among the guests, taking with him the feeling that he had finally said everything he needed to. Time passed. Years later, Han Ji-seok's ashes were scattered over the sea he had so often watched from his window. No one organized a ceremony, only a small note in a newspaper read, "He left in peace." That same day, Eun-woo walked to the beach with her son and silently gazed at the horizon. The boy asked if she had forgiven him, and she replied, "Yes, because when love is true, time teaches us what pain couldn't." The wind blew hard, lifting the sand and carrying away the last particles of the past. And in that moment, the story ended. Not with revenge, but with redemption. The man who doubted love paid the highest price, living long enough to learn the value of trust. And the woman who was humiliated found her greatest victory, not in proving herself right, but in moving on in peace. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and continue following Korean stories that show that fate can be cruel, but time, wisely, always returns the truth to those who knew how to wait.